All right, Madam Chair, thank you for the introduction and thank you for scheduling this meeting and including me as a participant. I'd like to call the meeting of the Kane County Treasurer Committee to order and ask that our clerk please call the roll.
Brunel.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Gately. Hicks.
Here.
McConaughey.
Here.
Meyer. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Prague. Strathman.
Here.
All right, thank you. We have a quorum, and so we'll move through agenda. We do not have minutes to approve as this is our first meeting. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address us during public comment? Hearing none, we'll move on to new or unfinished business. Just for a start, I'd like to thank everyone for participating and taking the time to do this. Obviously, when there's appointments to be made for elected offices, it's important that we do a thorough and unbiased job in doing that. And I want to compliment Madam Chair for selecting a committee of a diverse committee. I think that will help us accomplish that goal. There are a couple things that I'd like to discuss in open session and maybe have a brief executive session. My goal for the meeting today would just to set a path for us to get this process completed. As we know, the Treasurer's Office is busy year-round, but we've got a situation where tax bills are going to be coming out soon. And to get someone in place sooner rather than later is, I think, in the best interest of our constituents. So with that goal in mind, the first thing under the agenda was to establish the charges and goals of the committee. I think it's pretty straightforward. We have 8 resumes for individuals who've applied for the position. It's my understanding that the criteria would be that this group would be charged with evaluating those applications and making recommendations to the chair, Madam Chair, who in turn would then make a recommendation to the county board for approval. The ultimate decision would be made at a vote of the county board. And so our goal is to work our schedule in as such so that we could get this to a county board meeting within the near future. The only criteria that well, a couple of things. I believe that there is a requirement for residency in Kane County, and by statute, because Mr. Rickert was a Republican who had been elected, the replacement has to be someone who was a member or of the Republican Party, or who at least voted Republican in the prior election. And so with that background, Madam Chair, is there anything else you'd like to add regarding the goals for the committee or our charge?
No, not at all. But I would like to remind people who are attending, other board members, that if you come to the executive session, that everything is held in strict confidence. This is a personnel matter, not to be shared. And I would request that only the seated committee members are allowed to address the chair as we discuss, mutually address our selection and determination of resumes and narrow that down. I think that's owed a deep respect to our volunteers and committee members. So,
thank you. And I apologize for not being there in person. Especially as chairman of the committee, I think it's important to be in the room. So all the meetings, I'll be there absent an emergency in person.
Thanks for letting me know.
Just by way of
public comment.
I'll talk to you later. All right, love you. Bye.
Way of history, in recent history, the county board has gone through this process, at least during my tenure on the board, once when Senator McConaughey was chairman of the board, and we had to deal with a replacement when Judge Barsani, who was then acting state's attorney, was appointed to the bench. And so Joe McMahon was appointed in his stead, and that process was fairly seamless. And I think we went through a straightforward process, gave everyone who was interested. There were quite a few applicants. But when it came to a vote, the board was unanimous in support of appointing Mr. McMahon. So the goal is to make it as seamless as we can now. I know we've got, this is really a nonpartisan issue, and we have representatives from every party here and a broad base of people. So I think we'll be able to accomplish that. As far as moving forward, I do want to, in executive session, talk a little bit about the vetting procedure and as it relates to some of the specific applicants. But I think the goal of the committee today would be to set up some meetings for perhaps some interviews that would occur probably next week if that would accommodate everyone's schedule. And with a hope that after the interviews, we would then convene again and come up with a final recommendation. So obviously, with the assistance of Jane in the Madam Chair's office, we'll coordinate schedules to try to accomplish that. And if anyone has a problem with scheduling, certainly let us know. And we'll try to accommodate as best we can. Before we go into executive session, is there any comment or questions that anyone has that either from the committee itself or from the public that's present at this point?
Briefly, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Thank you. And this is Mr. Meyer. I don't necessarily have an objection to moving into executive session. I do have maybe just a kind of a philosophic thing here regarding it. I mean, this is unlike a traditional employment matter, that this is a public office. And so I guess inquiring as to the depth of the conversation we're intending to have in executive session. I don't know if this is, I don't think from your comment that we're looking to try to vet or really filter through specific candidates in the conversation today. But I think as much of this as we can have be public, I think should be public because it is a public office. There are obviously some things that may arise where there's no other way to do it because of certain sensitivities or maybe specific concerns about specific applicants. But I think as much of the process as can be public should be because it's a public office, not just a traditional employee.
Right.
That's kind of my philosophic statement or philosophic belief about moving into executive session. My other concern, though, is that on our published agenda, it doesn't state a specific purpose for moving into executive session today. One of the requirements of the OMA is that if we have an executive session, you have to publish on the agenda the purposes for which the public body is going to move to executive session. So I don't know if there's a particular concern about that, Mr. Hochheit, or not. But and again, I don't think we're getting into too much today. So maybe it's not an issue, but it's just something maybe going forward to be cognizant of.
That's correct. One of the questions I had initially was whether it was appropriate for this committee to use executive session as a tool. I think when dealing with personnel issues, it's appropriate to do so. I agree with you, Mr. Meyer, that we want to be as transparent as possible. And I think, if there's anything that we're discussing in executive session that you object to being private, we certainly can either move to conclude the executive session or when we're done, have a consensus that will make a statement as to what was specifically discussed if the committee is comfortable moving that forward. In this instance, the purpose of the executive session would clearly be for the purpose of discussing personnel, and that is a legitimate criteria under the statute.
Mr. Hochheit, we have a question from Mr. Shepro.
Yeah,
Sure.
at the risk of playing lawyer, there's a specific exception in the Open Meetings Act for deliberations to discuss the appointment of any elected position or the replacement of any elected position. And I believe that actually executive session doesn't even have to be on an agenda because you can always move into executive session because you can't take final action.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shepro. I would, with that background, if no one has any further questions or comments, entertain a motion to go in executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel / appointment of an elected, a replacement elected official.
Brown moves.
I'll second.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and because we have people on Zoom, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Brunel. Brown,
Yes.
Gately. Hicks,
Here.
McConaughey,
Here.
Meyer,
Yes.
Prague, Strathman.
Yes.
Right, the motion is approved. All right, we're back in open session, and after a brief discussion in executive session, I can report that we've established a schedule for meetings next week. They will be published. There'll be a meeting on Tuesday starting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, running to approximately 5 p.m. for the purpose of primarily conducting interviews. The committee has also set a meeting at 9 o'clock next Friday to continue our deliberation if needed, with the hope that by then we would be in a position to make a recommendation to Madam Chair and the county board as to what the consensus of the committee was. And with that, is there anything else that the committee would like to discuss? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, clerk, please call the roll, or I'll take a voice. All those in favor say aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Mr.
Rose.
Walsh, I
Yes.
apologize again. Under the governor's order, or actually
Roll
the
call.
statutory amendment for allowing virtual meetings by public bodies, there has to be a
A
roll
roll
call
call.
vote on
Okay,
all
well,
motions.
roll call on motion to adjourn. Before we call the roll, I just want to thank everyone again for their participation and look forward to working with you collaboratively next week. Clerk, please call the roll on the motion to adjourn.
Brunel,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Hicks,
Yes.
McConaughey,
Yes.
Meyer,
Yes.
Prague, Strathman.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you,
Blair.
Ron.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.